Hey everybody, today I'm here with Sydney. She is an immunology PhD student and she's in her fourth year. She's going to talk to us some about her experience as a PhD student and maybe some of her research. Hi Sydney, thanks for being here and doing this. How you doing?
Yes, I'm doing pretty good. Nothing to complain about. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, well, happy to have you. So can you just give, I know you're an immunology student. Could you just give like a quick, I guess, a little background on yourself?
Sure. Yep. So my name is Sydney, and I come from the Southwest of the United States. And the way I kind of got into research is a little bit more abnormal than a lot of people. I feel like when I've talked to their PhD students, they're very much like, I've known since I was like 5 years old that
Yeah.
this is what I wanted to do. And that was not me at all. I actually didn't like science a lot growing up. But when I was 9 years old, I was diagnosed with a form of IBD, and that kind of ended up shaping a lot of my life. And when I became 14, I actually learned a lot about like biology and DNA and genetics and everything. And I was like, where has this been my entire life? So I did science growing up, and then ended up going to university. From there, I got involved in undergraduate research in a lab that focuses on intestinal inflammation, but from the lens
Hmm.
of the immune system. And so that's where I'm currently doing my dissertation work. And I fell in love with research and everything like that. So hence why I decided to stick around for as
Yeah.
long as it takes. So
Yeah.
yes, that's a little bit about me.
Awesome. Thank you for that. It's really cool that you were able to kind of, I guess, be inspired kind of by your own life, you know?
Yeah.
The, so you already answered this a little bit and then like with when I introduced you, but so you're like, what kind of science do you do in your head when you describe yourself to someone? Like what kind of scientist are you?
Yeah. And actually, this was funny because I just came back from a conference and we ended up running into one of my faculty members at my university there. So it was kind of funny
Hmm.
because we were in a completely different area than we normally are in. And he got introduced to us. And he's like, yeah, these are mucosal immunologists. And I was like, yeah, you know what? You're right. We are mucosal immunologists. So typically when people ask what I do, I'll just say PhD student, but more specifically, I really do see myself and training as becoming hopefully a mucosal immunologist. So to kind of expand upon what that means a little bit, I focus on the immune system, but from the perspective of different mucosal barriers. So your
Hmm.
intestine is a mucosal barrier. Your mouth, your lungs, things like that, those are considered mucosal barriers. I just tend to look at the gut.
Okay. That's really interesting. I might actually have some real like actual questions for you towards the end of this. Um, so you again you kind of already answered a little bit. You're a mucosal immunologist, but could you give us like a slightly deeper insight into your research? Obviously, you don't have to talk about anything unpublished. Don't want anything trying, no one trying to steal it.
Yeah. So essentially, kind of I work on are different receptors that are expressed on different immune cells. And yes, epithelial cells count as immune cells. And so I look at their receptor biology and essentially how they initiate different processes and how within different intestinal inflammation states they can be protective or detrimental and why they do that. And is it a particular cell type that they're expressed in that does that? Or is it just something inherent to the receptor itself? So that's kind of more broadly speaking what I tend to work on.
Okay, thank you. I'll be honest. I have like biology, biochem is just like woo, for me.
I
So it
will I will say I almost switched to organic chemistry in undergrad because I love
really.
organic chemistry very much.
I rarely hear someone else that says they liked organic chemistry. I mean, obviously, I loved organic chemistry. It's what my field was. But yeah, I understand why people don't like it though.
Yeah. I don't know. I between Gen Chem and OChem. Gen Chem was fine. I didn't mind it. When I got to OChem, I was like, this makes so much more sense to my brain. And I loved OChem.
Yeah, I always felt it was like a very satisfying puzzle.
Yes,
Um,
exactly.
so on the topic of your field, whether you just kind of want it broadly as like immunology or mucosal immunology, what do you think is something that people most misunderstand about your field?
That's a good question. Um, it's a great question. I feel like Oftentimes, when people hear the word immunology or the immune system, the most time people interact with that word is typically in terms of vaccination and things like
Hmm.
that. Like that's oftentimes when people think about it. Or if you have heard the term autoimmune disease. Those are typically the two times people, at least that aren't within research, tend to interact with that word. And so I feel like it's a big common misconception that that's kind of what all of us do. And that your immune system, actually, this is a little soapbox of mine. This idea that pro-inflammatory cytokines or pro-inflammatory inflammation is really detrimental and bad. And while that is true, yes, it is bad if left unchecked. You actually do need pro-inflammatory responses because it's how you clear out infections. That's how you are able to recover from a virus or a bacteria. And on the contrary, too high anti-inflammatory responses can also be detrimental. And so the reality is that your immune system is this very key balance that needs to be maintained. And so you don't want to be shutting off one or shutting off the other. They truly both need to coexist, to be able to work properly and to be able to keep you healthy. Because at the end of the day, after you've cleared out a virus, for example, you need the anti-inflammatory response to come in to initiate repair, make sure the tissue is all good, clear out everything. And so I feel like that's kind of like one of my soapboxes is whenever I hear like anti-inflammatories. And I'm like, but you need pro-inflammatory responses. Otherwise, you would not be able to clear any type of infection or any type of assault that your immune system goes under.
That's a good one. I feel like the one that I used to get into, and it was like kind of pedantic, but it was usually because people would use it as like kind of a. I would only really get on people when they use it kind of like to talk down to other people. They'd be like, "Well, I only eat organic eggs." I'm like, "Yeah, we all do. What inorganic ones are you eating? Those are rocks." Like,
Yeah. That's not how that works.
yeah, and I would just, or yeah, like I said, I would only really do it if someone was I felt was being kind of like elitist and rude about like, and I was like, actually, they're like, I only eat organic salt. I was like, I guarantee you that's like an inorganic salt, bro, actually. But um, but yeah, but everyone has I feel like everyone has their one little thing that they argue. I saw two guys one time, they were arguing over the like the pH of water, and I thought they were about to hit each other. Um but two,
Interesting. I feel like that's
two
a
both
weird.
two both great scientists. The one guy I think was taking it way more seriously than the other guy. I think the other guy was kind of egging him on, but then he got into really into it too.
Mhm.
Um, but so kind of on the vein of misunderstanding or things, are like own little soapboxes. What's something that you think the STEM community can work on, whether it's just kind of in general or something related to your field?
Yeah, these are great questions. I'm having a great time already.
Thanks.
I feel like the biggest thing for me is personally for me, for my future career prospects, I'm really interested in science communication, hence why I was
Hmm.
really excited about this. And kind of getting to let the general public know what scientists look like, what we do. Because like I said, growing up, I never had that role model. I'm a first generation student, so my parents didn't get to finish college. And I didn't really know that science and research, A, what it was, and B, what that career path would even look like. Because I feel like oftentimes it's very rudimentary when we teach people of like, all right, bachelor's, master's, PhD, postdoc, PI, and that's it. When the reality is that there's so many more jobs out there and there's so many more opportunities and skills that you actually learn in a PhD that could lend itself to many other career types. And so something I'm very passionate about is making sure people understand what we do. And I feel like so the STEM community and scientists at large aren't always the best at it, but I also want to make the caveat that I feel like what a science communicator is also a very specific job that requires very specific training. And I don't think the onus should be on every single scientist ever to be a scientific communicator, because the reality is that we all have different jobs and we all fulfill different niches. Some of us are better at talking than others. Some of us are better at writing grants than others and things like that. And so I feel like it's really important to acknowledge the fact that we as a scientific community can do better when it comes to communicating with the general public. But at the same time, also recognizing that in and of itself is a very specific skill set that we also need to be training up people in the field for and getting them prepared for if that's the career track that they choose to pursue.
I think it's an excellent answer. Yeah, it is sometimes hard because you want to use, especially depending on what kind of audience you're talking to, you want to use language and verbiage that like shows that you have a mastery or knowledge of, not necessarily mastery, but like a deep knowledge of the subject, and use the the correct terms because these words were developed for a reason. But also, you have to speak to someone that maybe they're a scientist, but they're not in your same discipline, or maybe someone just for whatever, I don't know, maybe they stumbled in off the street and they're at your presentation.
Hmm.
My old PI, she's like an organic chemist, I guess polymer chemist, maybe more polymer chemist now, but she taught like a polymers class. She said her greatest contribution to scientific reasoning or scientific learning, I'm sorry, was uh, relating was it the glass transition temperature as cuffing season, and how as it gets colder, no one wants to move around anymore.
But like those analogies are super helpful though. Like that's how I communicate with my family because I'm the only real like big scientist in my family. So if I talk to them in the same way I would talk to like my lab mate or my PI, it's not even going to attempt to go in. But if I use analogies, they're like, oh, that makes way more sense. And I'm like, exactly.
Yeah.
Like you already know these concepts. And in fairness in science, right, we do need to be very specific and very intentional about the language that we use. But if we're just talking to like a layman's audience of just like people who have general science background but don't have the niche deep interest in this exact
Hmm.
thing, it's like, yeah, it's exactly like XYZ. It's like, oh, well, why didn't you
Yeah.
just say that?
Yeah. I used to tutor students in what's called like well in a couple things, like a lot of algebra, and a lot of students were like, oh, I'm just so bad, I don't know any algebra. I was like, I guarantee you do, you just don't know you're doing algebra.
Yes.
Um, and
Hmm.
I would tell them like algebra is like drinking and drug math. And they're like, what do you mean? I was like, okay, you have $20, beers $5. How many beers can you buy? They're like, I can buy 4 beers. I was like, that's algebra. I mean, it's like a very rudimentary form, you know. I was like, that's algebra, dude. Like you can do it, trust me.
No, and seriously, like I always tell people, I'm like, yes, I'm a scientist, but at the end of the day, what I am paid to do and what the crux of my job is to ask questions and answer it. That's
Mhm.
my job. And so we all do those things every single day. We all ask questions. We all try to find answers to them in a controlled environment by the different situation and circumstances that you're in. That's all we get paid to do.
Yeah. Um, so again, a lot of these you're kind of already touching on. So sorry that we're kind of circling back, but so what made you kind of want to pursue a PhD past to just say your bachelor's?
Yeah. Um, I think the biggest thing for me was, like I said, like research, just seemed very far away, if that makes sense. Like it didn't seem very attainable. And again, to be completely honest, I didn't even know where to go, where to start. And so part of my major in undergrad is that we had to have some sort of research experience, either via a class or independent research experience. And so my undergrad advisor at the time was like, it's up to you, but you can kind of figure it out. So I ended up cold emailing my PI and just being like, hey, love to work in your lab. And he ended up Zoom interviewing me as well, because this was during COVID, because I started
Mhm.
there in 2021. And he was like, all right, like, sounds good, kid, let's go. And I ended up actually being the first undergraduate in his lab as well, which was really exciting. And from there, I basically kind of started learning what research actually was. I did not realize that research was as hands-on as it actually is. Most of my job, like I just got back from lab, is just project managing myself, making sure I do my experiments in the method and manner in which I want to do them at this point, being this far in. But at the time, as an undergrad, I mean, I'm just doing what I'm told. And so that was really
Mhm.
exciting too, to be like, wow, like I'm doing RT-qPCR and RNA. Like this is exciting. I'm doing a Western blot, which is only exciting when you're an undergrad. It's never exciting once you actually have to do them all the
Yeah.
time. Um, so really learning how hands-on it was, learning about they basically you get to dive deep into a topic, and it's up to you to read up on the topic, find the gap in knowledge, and how you want to fill it. That was really exciting to me. And due to some other extenuating circumstances, I was ended up basically taking on a graduate level project when I was an undergrad, which was terrifying at the time, but it really did solidify for me, as well as taking graduate level classes, that I could do this, that this was possible. Especially because graduate level classes I like so much better than undergrad classes. They were so much better. Um, so all of those things combined, I really was like, okay, like I can do this. And sat and talked down to my mentor, talked with my mentor, excuse me. And he's like, this is what you want to do for the rest of your life? I was like, yeah, I really like this. I like research, and I explained all the same reasons. And he's like, okay, then go for a PhD. He's like, not that you can't do a master's, but I think for you, if you know that this is the path you want to go down, there's no point in doing a master's if this is you're confident that this is what you want. So I ended up applying for the PhD and I got in and I was just, it was weird because I was explaining to somebody else today because I also gave a lab tour to a high schooler today. Um, it was weird being on campus as a graduate student for the first time and being
Mm.
like, wow, like this is what I want to be doing. Like, even though rotations are hard and taking all the classes is difficult, this definitely feels like what I was supposed to do. And so that's where I ended up here, and I'm still here. We passed comprehensive exams and all the hard stuff, and now we're just pushing towards the end. So,
That's great. Yeah, it's nice when it feels like, especially toward the end. I know in mine, especially, yeah, I was, yeah, you're giving tours to someone where that's like, or like kind of whether it's like a visiting scholar or new people, and it kind of feels that you're starting to become a little bit of like a micro authority figure, at least within the confines of your lab and your department. And I feel like it's a really big growth when you yourself realize it. Like other people probably realized it 6 months ago, but when
mhm.
you finally realize it,
Yeah, and it was weird because when we were at our conference, my boss told me and my lab mate, he was like, "You guys know you're the senior grad students now, right?" And we're like, "What? What do you mean?" And when we thought about it, we're like, it is weird to be at that stage because it creeps up on you so quickly. You really don't realize it. But at the same time, too, when we reflected back, we're like, no, we really have grown and we have learned a lot. And I can physically feel that my brain just thinks differently now, being having gone through this intense training process. So while it was a weird kind of reflection point, I'm like, you know what? Yeah, I am a senior grad student now.
that's awesome. So, kind of talking about how you decided to make that jump to PhD, apply to a PhD program. How did you decide what universities you were going to apply to, and how did you decide which one you were at? Was it just kind of like simple? But I'm gonna be honest, for me, it was not nearly in depth as you would think, and I kind of just went into grad school like pretty blind, honestly. I literally just went on a map and said, where would I want to live? And then picked like schools there and knew nothing else and just applied. So it was pretty much like I applied to like schools like North Carolina,
hmm
Tennessee, and Texas, I think, and maybe wanna, yeah, but like it was not like, oh, I really like this research. I was like, where would I want to live that's warm and has good barbecue?
But honestly, that's actually the advice that I give to even prospective students that we have coming to tour our university. I'm like, no, genuinely think about where you want to live because your cost of living is going to be a huge one, especially because at a PhD stipend, we do not make that much money. So you really got to consider how much money you're going to make. And also, could you be happy there anywhere from like 5 to realistically like 7, 8 years? Like, could you be happy there? I feel it's totally like a very reasonable thing.
Yeah.
But for me, I ended up only applying to my current university, and that was just because at the time I wasn't even 100% confident that I was going to get in. And I had figured I'm like, oh, well, like I'll give it a shot. If I don't, I'll try again next year, really kind of expand out. Because it was for a couple main reasons. Number one, like personal health issues. It's just a lot harder to deal with when you're 22 years old and you need intensive medical care. It's just a lot harder to move it versus if you just kind of stay where you've been treated. But I also am a very, family is very important to me. Family is very big to me. And having the support system here during the PhD has been so critical. So that's also what I tell my undergrads, and prospective students is go where you're gonna either have a support network or be confident you could build a support network. Because let me tell you, these past years been rough,
Yeah.
mentally trying to get through it. And again, we'll probably touch upon it later, but it's so much and it's a lot more than I think people realize. And so having them around has been super key and just taking my head out of it, honestly, and being like, nope, there's a life outside of a PhD. Like it is your life, but there's also life outside of it. And then also genuinely, I'm happy where I'm at. I really like all the graduate students I'm around. My cohort is the biggest out of I think the past couple years. There's like 6 of us, which for a PhD cohort is pretty decent size. Um, And I just, yeah, we're all really good friends. I really like how collaborative everybody is here. Genuinely, I've walked across like walked from where my lab is on campus to where my roommate's lab is on campus and literally ran into like five different people. And I'm like, hi guys, can I use this? Can I use that? Can I use like I use the electroporation machine from one lab and GFP from another. And so I really like that spirit about my university. And something I've appreciated now more being more exposed to more scientists is also the training environment that they've instilled in us of specificity of language, making sure you explain your background, making sure that your science is accessible, and really pushing us to be the best that we could be. Um, at the time, it was very intimidating, but now having been through that process, I'm so much more appreciative of it to be able to know that I can come out of this confidently, have gained skills, and also be confident in my abilities as a scientist because I've been pushed through the ringer and been like, are you sure that that's what you mean? Your hypothesis doesn't make sense. And then at the time, you're like, okay. But then when you really think about it, you're like, you know what? They were right. That did not make any sense. What was I thinking? So those are the main key aspects as to why I chose to stay where I was.
I think that's you make a really good point. Last like I don't know when it was, a couple days ago, maybe not that like less than a week ago. I talked with Dr. Logan Fisher. He's a an assistant professor at in in Iowa. Not at Iowa. I'm totally blanking on the name of his Grandview University. And
Okay.
we talked about how he picked, and he said, yeah, he drew a map, or he took a map and he basically drew a circle around like how far of a drive to him and his wife's family was. They wanted that support network. We
Hmm.
kind of talked about how I think some students, it's very easy to do this, I think, can get kind of mesmerized by like a big name university or a big name PI or program, and they get a little blinded to that. And then without looking at, like you said, some of the things like, will they be happy here? Like, does this have outside of the lab, does this have the creature comforts or like, I guess, like infrastructure amenities that they want? So it's really good to hear that, someone else is also thinking about that.
Yeah, and I've definitely ran into students. I'll never forget this. It was my interview weekend for my PhD, and they told us a stipend, and this girl raised her hand and she was like, "Well, UCSF is offering us like $50,000," and then the person goes, "Yeah, but you're living in San Francisco. Like think about that. Like genuinely not like trying to be funny, but also like that's not going to go as far as you think. Like on paper, it looks like a big number, but the reality of what you're actually going to be living is so different." um, from that. And I said, I feel like you bring up a great point. Like that people, it's easy. It really is easy to be like, wow, like these are such cool places. And they are cool places. If that's where you're happy and that's cool for you, then great. If working for that PI who has like 40 students works for you, I'm really happy for you because that's a whole different ball game. And it works for people and it works for some people, but it's important to know yourself before you go into that process. That way you don't end up burnt out or just resentful of the entire process. 'Cause I know so many people who've hated their PhD. And I've
Yeah,
thankfully, knock on wood, I've really enjoyed my PhD experience.
that's good. Yeah, some of those people are in groups that are such just like mini, they like almost like a small company. So you already answered this, so I'll just kind of skip over. But this next one was, how'd you get started in STEM? But you talked about it because you had, your own health issues, and then you didn't feel like you never kind of saw yourself, so you stumbled into it. So we can skip that one. But what advice would you have for like maybe some young students today that want to get involved in STEM, whether that's just maybe they're a high school student considering a STEM undergrad, or they want to look into like a graduate level degree?
Yeah. I feel like my advice is different for both levels, right? If you're in high school, I think it's important to really kind of look at your options for undergrad degrees and really kind of think about what's gonna get you to where you want to go. And what I mean by that is oftentimes, like for example, in the major that I was in, a lot of pre-meds, but it worked out because that major not only did it cover pretty much all the prereqs for medical school students, but it also had really good fundamental hard science classes that, regardless of being in medical school, were going to be helpful for what they wanted to maybe eventually pursue if they decided this wasn't for them. So I feel like that's the biggest thing. If you're interested in science, really try to find a degree that can make you more versatile, and teach you skills that are going to go beyond just your bachelor's degree. 'Cause I feel like oftentimes, sometimes majors aren't always the best at that. And so unfortunately, it's upon the student to really kind of do their research and try to look into what's going to be the best for them moving forward. And again, if you have to make a career pivot, what's going to benefit you the most? So I feel that's for high schoolers. And as far as undergrads, genuinely get involved in research, but I would again also emphasize that having those really core foundational science classes at the undergraduate level is going to prepare you so much more for what happens in lab. We've dealt with a couple of students with things like that. And I found, at least for me, being an older student in research, so a junior, senior in college worked out the best for me. Because I came into lab having that core foundation of what was expected of me. We could have conversations, and while I didn't necessarily understand all of the complexities, if someone was like, here's a Western blot, this is what it does, I was like, oh, I understood why we were doing it versus having this whole conversation of like, if I'd never been through those classes, like, what are you talking about? Like, I don't, like, yes, I've heard the word protein throughout my entire life, but I feel like it takes on a different meaning at an undergraduate level when you're pushed at that level. Um, so I feel like that's the biggest thing for me is getting involved in research, different types of research, if that's also what you're interested in, to really kind of decide if grad school is for you. Because I know some people who had horrible lab experiences in their undergrad, and like, I never want to do this again. And then they get into industry and they're like, I think I want to go back to academia. Maybe it was just a bad lab. Um, so understanding that there are different flavors, there's dry lab, there's wet lab, there's public health, there's so many different types of research that you could potentially be involved in. So just make yourself be available, and kind of also what I tell my incoming first year PhD students that I help mentor is let's just be open-minded. Truly don't be stuck on being like, this is the only path that I want to do. Because very rarely does life ever work out that way. So just being open to different experiences, being open to the world around you, um, and just kind of seeing where life takes you. I feel like that's having spoken to so many people, both at the interview stage as well as my friends, and how we've gone through this process, that's been by far the biggest piece of advice. So just don't close yourself off to any opportunity. Never, and I always tell people this, it never hurts to talk. It never hurts to talk because the worst thing that's going to happen, they're just going to tell you no. You go, all right, well, guess I'll move on to the next one. Like, it truly, I've only seen it be a detriment to people to not be open versus being willing to have conversations and being willing to kind of just go to bat whenever you need to go to bat and just kind of going from there.
That's some great advice. Yeah, you can't like lock yourself into one because all things change, your interests might change. Not even that they change, they just might evolve or just
Mhm.
refine themselves. And you never know what life's going to look like, whether it's a job market or just the field. You said it's 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 years. It might be totally different at the end of how you started. So I think that's excellent advice. So, what would you, switching gears a little bit, what would you say has been the biggest challenge you've had as a scientist?
It's funny because we just went through this past year. I think it's funny because most of our job is dealing with failure because half the time experiments just literally don't work. And you're like, well, I did everything I could, still didn't work. So ironically, even though you deal with it so often, I think it's truly just when nothing is working. Everything back to back to back. Your grants are getting rejected. Your experiments aren't working. At least in my instance, my mice weren't breeding. Things like that, where it's just like I am out of control of this. I cannot control this. I can only control myself. But it's so disheartening and very frustrating when it's just happening boom, 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 boom. And it just feels like you're very stagnant, that nothing is moving, nothing is making sense, nothing is working. Um, and so I feel like that's been the biggest hurdle is learning how to just kind of deal with that and being okay. with the uncertainty and being okay with that being out of control. And understanding that, especially with most PhD students, while some of them can get a paper out relatively early in their PhD, I feel like the more common norm is like that you get like one or two papers out back to back when you're finishing up because you've just been building up so much at that point. So being okay with being in the middle of the process and understanding that that is going to happen and that that's okay. So I feel like oftentimes when you're in the PhD, because you're in charge of your own time and because you're independent, you're like, oh, like this should work. Oh, like it's my fault, it's me. When in reality, it actually isn't. There's so many other confounding variables. There's how much money a grant is being given, allocated to give to students. Genuinely, someone's grant just might fit their objectives better, and that's doesn't reflect anything on you. It's just an objective fact. And so I think being more okay with just kind of taking yourself out of the equation almost and just being like, that's just the way the cookie crumbles sometimes. There's literally nothing I could have done differently that would have changed the outcome, short of just being a different person altogether. And so I feel like that has been the hardest lesson that I really had to learn this past year of just being okay with being in the weird middle phase of just, well, I I still gotta get up and go to lab every day. And that's really the true testament is if you can still get up and still go, even when you're like, I would literally want to be anywhere else than here right now. Um, that's probably been the biggest thing. But like I said, it's really taught me a lot about being resilient, and just showing up even when it's hard and you just some days you can't, but you still do it anyways.
I think that's an excellent answer. I think that's, kind of referencing back to the one question. I don't think people necessarily realize or think about how much like research scientists fail at what they're doing. It's like we all like you see the big wins or what worked, but there's like a whole laundry list of things that just didn't work to get to that one thing that did work. And yeah, along the way, it gets really frustrating because especially like you said, you're at some point, almost everyone I knew got into a rut where just think nothing worked. And you
Hmm.
gotta tell yourself it's not you, or be like, well, is it me, but not necessarily like me as a person, but is there something I can control to be maybe
Hmm.
accounting for this variable or something? So I think that's an
Yeah.
excellent answer for people watching. Going into it, if you're considering PhD, you need to have some sort of resilience, and it doesn't mean you can't have bad days or bad months, or like have days where you come home and you're just like, oh my God, how am I going to get through this week? But
Hmm.
like you said, at the end, you got to wake up and you got to go to lab. So
Yep. And I feel like too, it's also a big lesson is also learning to take breaks and that it's okay to take breaks and it's actually probably better for your brain if you take breaks. 'Cause that's something I've been forced to really do this year is be like work for 2 months really like on for 2 months, take a week off. On for 2 months, take a week off. And truly having that time to just be away and to just exist as a human makes coming into lab so much easier and just being like, wait a minute, like you'll be in the shower, like, wait a minute. That's why that didn't work. Because you're relaxed and your brain is actually allowed to just think. That's not just being like, why is this like singular detail not working?
yeah, that's really true. Because you're overworked, even if you're like working a lot, eventually the quality of your work will suffer, and it's going to be less overall like output than if you had just taken the rest, worked a normal amount of time. Um,
Mhm.
so all right, so on the opposite side of that, what would you
Mhm.
say the favorite part, your favorite part of your field or your research is?
I really like um within like my job itself, I really like teaching and mentoring. I really like seeing undergrads in the lab be able to like kind of steer their own project and see them start to put the pieces together and then be like, oh, so that's what I'm gonna do next. I'm gonna do this, right? I'm like, yeah, we're gonna do that next. So that's one of my favorite aspects of my job. But I also really love experimental design and having meetings with my boss and my PI and just being like, all right, like I have this idea. This is how I want to do it. and like we'll go through it together and like, kind of detail it out. Or right before we've been to a conference a couple weeks ago, I was reading some papers and some things started clicking in my head. And I was like, wait a minute. And so I was like Googling a bunch of different papers, try to figure this out. And I walk up to him and I was like, all right, here's a flow chart of everything I just learned 30 minutes ago. And we're walking through it and he's like, why are you showing me this? I'm like, can I order this antibody? And he's like, yeah, that's fine. But things like that of just being like, I can feel my brain think differently. And again, I love the experimental design of being like, this is our objective. How are we going to do it? How are we going to design it? All the intricacies of like time, what are we going to pull from it? How many days are we going to let the cells be seeded? All of those things that can factor into an experiment, I absolutely love about my job. And as far as the field in general, I really think immunology is just very cool. And just how we kind of have evolved to learn so much about how our immune system truly it's amazing that we are all alive today. And how all of our cells in our body just communicate with each other. I love learning about like cytokine signaling because I'm like, oh, they're just talking to each other. That's all they're doing. And they have these really complicated ways of communicating with each other to keep your body safe and to keep you functioning on a day-to-day basis and not getting sick. So I feel like that's always like the really cool part is learning how like what each of those players do and how they contribute to overall keeping us healthy. Or if we are have a disease state or if we're sick, how can we manipulate the immune system to then try to get us back to our starting point? So those are the things that I really like to hear about. And I'm like, what are you learning about? Like, what are the B cell people doing? What are the T cell people doing? That's what I always really enjoy.
Okay, that's a great answer. Um, so talk about what you love about your field. And what are your kind of your plans, goals after PhD? Are you looking more towards academia? I know you said you really like, getting to teach students and kind of see them kind of start getting it. Or do you think you want to go maybe more towards industry, or what are you feeling?
Yeah, I'm pretty open still at this point, just because of everything going on in the world. Um, but ideally, I would love to do something with science communication, whether that be through the government or whether that be through a company, things like that, working at an academic institution, to kind of help do more things like this, right? And talk to students about how to actually get into research and kind of work on that side of it. Because that truly, like these types of interactions really serve like a dual purpose of like they remind me oftentimes of like why I love what I do. But then a big passion of mine, and we kind of touched upon it a little bit, is making sure things are accessible to other people. And letting other people know that scientists, like, yes, we sometimes wear lab coats, but oftentimes we're just kind of silly little guys who are nerds, who have really niche special interests. We've just been trained on how to do that. And that it's not as unattainable as a lot of people think it is, and honestly, quite frankly, as it is sometimes. Because, unless you have had family and things like that that can support you. If you have a spouse, if you have something else that can like financially support you as well, like science can be a barrier for a lot of people because of not even things that like not even the person themselves, but just the circumstances surrounding them. But also understanding that, you know what, if this is so truly something that you want to do and this is something you want to pursue, yes, it's 5 to 8 years of your life, and it that sounds like a long time, but the reality is that it goes by so quickly. And my big thought process for me when I started is I'm like, I'm gonna be 28 regardless of whether I do this or not. So I might as well be 20 with a PhD than just 28. And so just knowing that if this is truly, truly, truly something you want to do, um, that it is possible. And so that's something I'm very passionate about when it comes to my career and kind of how I see things moving forward. But also, I'm cool with being a research scientist. I love just doing research, walking in, having my plan for the day, maybe mentoring undergrads underneath another PI. Like you write the grants, I'll train the trainees. Like we can work together. So that's kind of where I see my future and my career going.
Okay, those all sound like great plans. Sound like, you're very in the best way, not just like, oh, I'll take whatever comes my way, but you're just very open minded, and but as have a plan. That's, I think, the best way to be. 'Cause I know some people are like, for me specific, I knew I wanted to go to industry. But I will say I realized that I liked teaching more than I thought I would. But and then in
Mhm.
a healthy way, it still confirmed for me that they're like, no, this isn't what I want to do. But like, I actually didn't hate this.
And but I've also really liked too is when talking to other people, like like anything, right? You're gonna have your pros and cons. But the nice thing about industry, at least from what I've heard, is like it's very fast paced. And yes, you don't get to work on what you want to work on, at least from like a traditional independent academia perspective. But you get a 9 to 5. You mostly get weekends. Like your brain can turn off when it needs to. And that is also so nice to be able to be like, this is just my job now. I'm not beholden to this. I'm not tied to this the way that I was in academia. And on the flip side, I've also heard people be like, academia is great because I have flexible work hours and I can work on whatever I want, but money's unstable and things like that. So there's always going to be pros and cons. But I can definitely see myself kind of going either direction because again, both have their pluses.
Yeah, it's a absolutely great point. Um, so all right, I got one more like the kind of prep questions for you that I thought of, and then I have one question about some immunology stuff. So someone recently commented on a video because I made a video like, what would you want to know about a PhD program, like, or if you're interested? And someone asked, how do I know what are red flags and green flags for picking committee members from a PhD committee? So what are your thoughts on that?
I thought you were going to say the lab itself, not the committee members.
One.
Um, The best thing to know, unfortunately, like anything in life, no matter what you're going to end up doing, is politics. There's always going to be politics involved. Um, so I feel like the best piece of advice is, of course, talk to other students within your lab that have them as like their committee, but also outside of your lab that have had them on their committee. Kind of get a feel for how they are because I know some PIs where people are like, I would never work for them, but they're fantastic on a committee because they're genuinely willing to help. So kind of getting that perspective, but also I think it's important to have a mix of junior and senior faculty. Junior faculty, I found not that like more senior faculty aren't helpful at all because they definitely can be, but I feel like junior faculty because they're just starting out, sometimes they can relate to you a little bit more because they're closer to where you were than senior faculty. And again, also knowing kind of where your PI is. If your PI is more senior and they're really pushing for you to not graduate, you're gonna need some other people on your committee to kind of really be in your corner, to kind of advocate for you when you're not in the room. And on the flip side too, again, same thing with junior faculty. If they're kind of a similar scenario, right? If they're pushing for you to not graduate, but you got like four senior people, they're gonna be like, we're still gonna pass you anyway. Um, so being aware of that, again, being aware of who doesn't work well with who, unfortunately. I have seen committees and comprehensive exams be derailed because nothing, the student did perfectly fine. The committee members just couldn't agree. And that's not fair to the student, but that's the reality of the situation. So I think just kind of being aware of those things. But honestly, the weird thing is that your committee definitely matters, but your committee ultimately should be there to help you. They should never be there to hinder you. Everyone's goal in that room should be to test you to make sure that you're the best scientist that you can be with given the tools that you are. So if you feel at any point that someone is not meeting that, the good news is that committees are interchangeable. They're never static. You can always move people in and out as you see fit and as your project grows, quite frankly. Because the reality is that you may need expertise in one field one time and then be like, oh, well, my project's changed now. I guess I don't need you anymore. And it shouldn't be taken personally. That's just the way that it goes. But that's been the biggest thing when we built my committee was what expertise did we need? Because my project is pulling from like 5 or 6 different fields. So we're like, all right, who do we need? Who do we know is going to work well together? Do I have a good mix of senior and junior faculty? And honestly, everyone that I've had on my committee has been fantastic. They've always been super helpful. I just had a committee meeting about a month ago, And outside of like the scientific expertise that they gave me, I really appreciated at the end that they were very comforting, just like to me in general, being like, you are doing a good job. Like you are pushing forward, you're making good progress. Like you're doing just fine. And so I think having those people around, and also now that I'm thinking about it, make sure they ask you questions because it's kind of not helpful to just have somebody sitting in a room and just good job, kid, and moving on and having nothing to say about it. I feel like the further you move into graduate school, you realize like, oh, if no one's asking questions, that's actually not a good thing. Either they were tired or they just were not paying attention, or maybe both. So definitely make sure you have people who are engaged, asking questions. Because to me, it'd be a red flag if I have somebody in the room and I'm like, why were you there? You're just taking up the space of somebody else who maybe would be more engaged. So I guess that would be my red flag is if you go to a committee meeting and you realize that the person's not really super engaged, I would just swap them out. Because again, they should be there to help you. They should be there with you as our number one goal, pushing you forward, making you the best that you can be in a reasonable time frame. Um, and things like that. They really genuinely should have your best interest at heart. And if you, at whatever point, feel that they don't, you can swap them out at any time.
That's a really good point. I ended up having someone like a pretty last second swapped out on mine. And that was just more of like a I knew it'd be like a last minute scheduling conflict. And yeah, it was actually pretty easy. And they luckily they were great. They're like, by the way, I already asked so and so, they're willing to be my stand-in. You're good to go. But I was just like, oh, that was actually not that bad. I would have um
Yeah, it is weird when you're like, hey, so I don't really need you anymore. But I've at least found if they're good faculty and they're good people, they're just gonna be like, okay, like
yeah.
I still wish you the best. If you need me, I'm always here. If you need anything, I'm here. But I think also too, like, at least you would hope most people in academia would understand that's not like an ego thing. It's genuinely like you just need expertise because you are pulling from so many different aspects of your field and maybe outside of your field. Like if you're doing something completely different, you're gonna need an expert in that field regardless. Or even sometimes like people will back out of committees because of their own personal reasons. And it's literally nothing against the student. It's just life happens. Like, yes, faculty can be scary and PIs can be scary, but the reality is that they're just people. They're just humans just like us, and they also go through things. And so just also keeping that in mind too. Like I've also had people back out of mine because of personal life reasons, and it's no shame, no harm against me because I'm like, are you okay at the end of the day? So yeah, so it's plenty of different things that can happen. Again, that's why I like to always tell people because even my interviewees for our PhD also ask the exact same question. They're like, "What about my committee?" And I'm like, they are important, absolutely, but it'll come. You will get used to it and things are going to align the way that they're supposed to.
Okay. Yeah, that's great. Now, because you kind of brought it up, you thought that's where I was going. What's your advice for picking a lab? Like, what's some red flags you think to look out for?
Um, Anybody who expects you to be there 24/7 on the weekends and on holidays, I suppose it's a pretty obvious one. But one that I've like barring kind of the obvious ones, right? Of like if they yell at you, if you're uncomfortable, like of course. Um, Kind of maybe a more subtle one is, well, two things. Make sure that you like everybody in your lab. And what I mean by that is not just your PI, but everybody in that lab, that you could at least get along with them. Because the reality is that even if your PI is super involved, like mine is fantastic, I see him all the time, he's great. He's being a PI. He's writing grants, he's mentoring other students, he's on committees, he's teaching, he has other commitments, right? So I see my lab mates obviously way more often than I see him. And so we all really like each other. We all get along super well. We're all super collaborative. We're all helpful. It's great. But I've also seen people be in other situations where that's not the case. And again, they don't have a great time because they're like, the PI is fantastic, but I don't have anyone else when they're not around. Um, so being aware of that. And then on top of it, making sure that your mentoring style fits the mentor you're picking, which might be easier said than done because especially if you're getting into a PhD a lot younger versus older, maybe you haven't necessarily figured that out yet, and that's okay. But I've seen a lot of different PhD students come through my program. I talked to a lot of them, and that's been the biggest thing is just like if your mentoring style doesn't fit your mentor, it's just no matter how hard you try sometimes, there's just going to be that natural tension that exists there. And, I also want to make it very clear. There is no shame if you need to be micromanaged. If that's how you learn the best and that's how you push, there's definitely mentors out there that will do that. And vice versa. If you're a more like laid back kind of person, is like, I don't want somebody over me, that's me. There are mentors out there for that. But understanding what you need to be successful and what you need to get things done in a reasonable time frame, and all of that, I think is really critical and requires a lot of self-reflection, honestly, to kind of know what's going to work for you. But I would say that's the biggest thing is that one's more subtle because you're like, oh, it's like another red flag because like during our rotation, like yeah, I kind of thought they were micromanaging me a little bit, but maybe it's just because I'm a rotation student and take them at their word. Take them at their word, and if at any, and sometimes if that's the only option you have, it is what it is. But if you can give yourself as many options as possible, especially if your graduate program allows rotations and things like that, that really is going to be the best way to try a couple different mentoring styles too to see what fits you the best. During my rotations, I had three incredible rotations, but they all mentored a little bit differently. And once I got through them, I was like, ah, okay, now I know how I work the best and who I work the best with. And so I think again, that one's more subtle, but definitely something to pay attention to and to keep in mind.
I think, yeah, you bring up a really great point with the management or mentorship style. That's something I would always tell students, because, like, so there was one PI at my university. She did great work. She was a really big name in her field. And like I personally, loved talking to her. But she was gone a lot because she was on all these speaking engagements because she did a lot of good research, was a big name. So if you're someone that like you not even necessarily needs to be micromanaged, but needs to check in with their boss, like their PI a lot, it's probably not going to be the best fit for you. Not that you couldn't succeed there, but just, you know, or again, there was usually it was like some newer PI that hadn't got tenure yet. They were like, I'm checking in with you at least once a week. I'm in the
Mhm.
lab all the time, and they wanted you to be there all the time. And some people are okay with that. If you're okay with it, more power to you.
Mhm.
Um, my big thing was like I don't work on the weekends, and now I worked plenty of weekends in my PhD. But the
Yeah.
worst way to get me to come in on Saturday is to tell me that I have to be there. Uh,
It's better if it's a choice. It's so much better if it's a choice.
and my PI that I ended up picking, she was. I like to think that she'd be a great PI for anyone, and I think she's just a great PI in general. But she was the best PI for me because there was, no one's perfect. There were some areas where maybe someone would see it as, oh, they can't handle that, or they need someone. I don't want to say it's a deficient. They need someone stronger in that area. I'll say,
Hmm.
but the areas where maybe she wasn't as strong, I that didn't bother me. Like those were things that weren't like I was fine dealing with. Whereas the areas where I really needed someone where if they didn't have that, I would have failed. She had that capability or that like trait, I guess you would want to say.
Absolutely.
And it was, I'll be honest, like I said, when I started my PhD, there really wasn't that much thought into it. So it just kind of, I got lucky. I just had like a good vibe after I talked with her. I just had like a really good inclination. But yeah, there were some times where like I was like, you said you have rough times in your PhD, even if you love it, and I was like really down. And I thought back once I finished FSAC, like in some of these critical moments, if I had someone that like reacted differently, not even necessarily poorly, but differently,
Hmm.
I might have just been like, oh, I'm done.
Hmm.
Like F
No,
this,
yeah. It truly is that serious. Like in all jokes aside, it is that serious. And like I completely understand where you're coming from because my PI was the exact same way. Like when I've been really hard on myself and I've been down, he's pulled me aside and been like, no. Like and the funny thing is he's not like a super emotional guy, but he's very matter of fact. And so because of that, I know that what he's saying to me is true. And him being like, you're going to be fine. You're doing just fine. I'm proud of you. I'm not upset with you. Like, you're doing great. And other times when he's like, dog, like you need to pick it up a little bit. Um, so I completely agree with that. Of just like you're never gonna find perfect because we're dealing with humans, of course. But an OPI is also going to be able to fulfill all your mentoring needs. They just can't because they're one person. And that's why like a committee is super helpful to fill in those roles. But the person that you're dealing with on like a daily-ish basis or a weekly-ish basis, I completely agree with you 1,000%. Like, no, it doesn't even have to be negative. It just, to your point, like different. Like if you get different responses from people, you're like, oh, like I didn't like that. Like that did not work for me. I really, really liked that because I completely agree.
Mhm. Yeah, no, my PI was great. I really like her. Oh, obviously I liked her. I picked her. I'm still in contact with her here and there. But yeah, also I was like, I thought she was cool. Like not only was she just like good and smart, like I thought she was like cool, which I think kind of helped me because I'm a non-traditional student, and also like yeah, I was never like super stereotypically like tight button shirt like STEM person. So I always felt like she was kind of like that too. It's like, like I like science, but I also like to party. Do you like to party?
I feel like my PI, I always like to say this, and I say it to him all the time. I say he loves to kiki with his girls. He loves to come into lab and just talk with us, and like we'll show memes to each other, and be like, "What you guys do this weekend? I saw this new horror movie. Did you guys see it?" And so I really, I really just also enjoy him as a person. Like he's just so fun to talk to. He loves puns, and I'm just like, I need you to stop with the puns, but it's all in good fun. And yeah, I really, really do enjoy him. Just like I said, as a human, I really enjoy that.
Yeah, that's always really I think special when you're able to enjoy your PI like that. So yeah, great answer. Not that test that's came out weird. A great answer. Um, so all right, so I have like an actual question about like mucosal immunology now,
hmm
and if you can't answer, that's totally fine. Because you know, anyway, so like intestines and stuff. All right, so I don't know how much you've seen of my stuff, but so like I was in the army before I was involved in like chemistry for any of my degrees. Um, After my deployment, or not even just my deployment, like there's a noticeable correlation with people that go over serve overseas wartime deployments and they
hmm
come back with gastrointestinal issues.
hmm
Have you, in your research, ever come across anything linking to that? At one point, there was something I remember I read. They thought it was related to the anti-malarial drugs we took. We had to take a lot of doxycycline, and they were saying it's because it was the extended use was is not really meant to be truly that long, like extended use, like for 9, 10 months. But yeah, um, and then it's actually like longer. You're supposed to think do a month before and a month after too. And and some of it was, it was like, oh, it's airborne toxin exposure or whatever. I don't know if you come across anything like that, and maybe not your specific research, but just maybe like something you read, or I don't
Yeah.
know, or how would like airborne toxins in a wartime environment like mess with your stomach?
Yeah. I feel like those are interesting questions because even like the conference I just came back from, like there's two things that kind of come to my mind. Number one, right, with any type of intestinal disorder, reason why it's an issue is because it's complex, right? There's so much going on there. From like your genetics to your obviously your immune system, your microbiome, but also just your environment. And being exposed to different types of environmental triggers can 1,000% exacerbate any either pre-existing conditions that just weren't known before, or perhaps turn something on that wasn't supposed to be turned on. Or turned off, quite frankly. Oftentimes, within research, it's actually very interesting. A lot of people are looking at inter-organ crosstalk. So about people who have like IBD, for example, can be at higher risk for like certain liver disorders or like neuronal disorders and things like that. And so even if like you get an infection like in your lungs and you're like I had a lung infection, why do I all of a sudden have like gastrointestinal problems? There's definitely research ongoing about that as well as research that's out there. kind of denoting those two different things. Because your entire body, that's why I also really like this field of immunology called systems immunology. And one person on my committee is like really about that. And he really pushes at me to look at things as a whole system. And it's so true because your entire body is really just one big system that's all trying to work together. And if one part of that circuit is malfunctioning or not working properly, it's not improbable to think that another portion of the system is also now going to malfunction due to that response. So I feel like that's kind of the more like broad answer. I can't give like super specifics,
No.
but at the same time too, I did learn about this. There's this thing called a predicts cohort. Um, Basically from patients who are from people who served in the army, and who served within the military, um, having to give, I believe it's blood samples. I'm not 100% certain, but um, uh, that hasn't been banked by the government. And now we can actually use those for research and things like that. So the reason why it's called predicts is because then it's showing um, people in the military who actually were our control group and people who actually developed like Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis post their enlistment and everything. So that was something really cool that I never knew about prior to going to this conference. And we can definitely I definitely want to look more into that personally because I'm not 100% sure if I'm describing it correctly. But it is just super interesting to have even just that database of things to be like, again, these are people, because you have to be healthy to go into the military. Like, you can't come in with pre-existing conditions. So, kind of what happened, what were they exposed to, things like that, that could potentially lead to the onset of these diseases later. So yeah, we definitely have some researchers who are working that in the field, and it's something that I'm interested in looking into anyway. So 'cause I think it's a really cool and useful tool to have that kind of happened by happenstance. We weren't really looking for it, and it just kind of happened. I'm like, oh, this is actually the perfect group to be able to actually answer and kind of learn more about all these different types of questions.
Hmm. That's really interesting. Yeah, it's good to know. I feel like I did know about that, whether it was like a rumor they used to tell us or that I actually heard it was like a true research project. Because yeah, oh yeah, when you're in the army, they own you. If they're like, hey, we need a blood sample for something, you're just like, all right.
Just let me know when I gotta be there.
Yeah, where do I gotta be and when? Yeah. But yeah, that was the rest of my question. I'll let you go. I don't want to take up any more of your time. I really appreciate it. This has been a great conversation.
Yeah,
Thank you so much. And everybody, again, that Sydney, she's a immunology PhD student in her fourth year. So thank you again, Sydney.
awesome. Thank you so much. I had a great time.